My name is Colin Jones. I live in South Melbourne and I have been doing research into naval history over a number of years. And the two stories I'm going to read are two of the results of my work in the past, about two men that I used to know. As an old man, Commander Stan Veale lived with his daughter in Elwood, but originally he was an Albert Park boy. Born in 1893, he saw many of the great naval events of the time, including the troop ships going to the South African War and the American Great White Fleet. For a boy with naval interests, it was an exciting time, and he was determined to be part of it. He joined the Naval Cadets in 1909 and trained mostly in the drill room at Williamstown. But in old age, he was proud to say to me, "I am the last person alive who has done the drill of the great guns of the Cerberus." As those guns were put into her in 1869, I like to think that I thus have a real link with the past. Of the 120 boys in the Corps, 22 were from Albert Park, and they all had to pass an inspection for suitability by Chief Gunner Bates. There was a lot of experience on the various old colonial warships, training on the bay. It was a real thrill for the teenager to take part in the Guard of Honour when the first two Australian destroyers, the Parramatta and Yarra, arrived at the end of 1910. He remembered in particular the smell of the oil fuel of these fine modern ships, compared with the coal smoke he had been used to. Then, with the King's approval, the name Royal Australian Navy in 1910, he was part of the Royal Australian Navy Reserve Cadets. Their drill was particularly praised by the Governor-General, Lord Northcote, when he visited South Melbourne Town Hall later that year. Bates observed to him that they were so good, "I could take them into action tomorrow." It was to come soon enough. In December 1913, there was a dummy run of the examination service at the Heads, with Midshipman Veale very seasick aboard the pilot steamer Victoria. So it came that in 1914, with international tensions rising, the examination service was again instituted at the Heads, and the forts were manned. So on the bright morning of Wednesday, 5th of August, the German steamer Pfalz was coming down the channel to pass the pilot steamer Alvina at the inner examination anchorage. Given clearance, she was heading for the Rip when Stan noticed a heliograph flashing Morse code from across the bay at Fort Queenscliff. He just read the end of the message, CLARED. He passed the news that war had been declared to Lieutenant Commander McWilliam, who would have airily brushed it aside, but Stan insisted and spoke to Chief Petty Officer Dorgan, who agreed to fly a signal flag to alert the naval signal crew at the fort. Very swiftly, soon after, there was a loud bang from one of the 6-inch guns, sending a shot right across the ship's bows. It was 10:57 a.m. Pilot Robinson had to point out forcibly to the German captain that if he didn't stop, the fort would fire into them, and so the ship was turned around to be captured. And that was how we came to fire our first shot of the Great War. McWilliam was angry that Stan had disobeyed him, but later, when the senior naval officer, Captain Richardson, arrived in a torpedo boat, there was no dressing down, but rather praise for his initiative. Next came the capture of the German steamer Hobart, coming in from the sea, for which Captain Richardson disguised his naval men until the very last, and young Stan quietly made off with the German Naval Mercantile Signal Code Book. Events moved rapidly for the 21-year-old, as he was able to volunteer for the expedition to capture the German Pacific colonies. Leaving a bitter cold Melbourne on the Sydney train, he was assigned to the requisitioned merchant ship Berrimah as part of the Naval Battalion. The capture of Rabaul was soon over, and he came back to Melbourne. So the war went on until victory was achieved with the armistice in 1918, and Lieutenant Veale came home. "I didn't feel very victorious," he told me. I just wanted to get home to my sweetheart. In May 1920, there was the great review of the Australian fleet off the beaches of South Melbourne, and Stan proudly led the guard of honour for the arrival of the Prince of Wales on the pier in Port Melbourne. In the extreme foggy conditions, the Prince was late, finally brought up from the heads from the battle cruiser HMS Renown in the destroyer Anzac. So meanwhile, Stan had to march his squad up and down just to save their circulation. As something of a farewell to youth, he was aide-de-camp to the senior naval officer in Victoria and was driving with him in his official car. "What are you doing sitting there, Veale, with your sword between your legs while I'm driving this car?" was the tart comment. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't drive." "Well, it's time you learned." And so Stan Veale learned by driving that big car up and down Beaconsfield Parade. The licence test, he said, was a mere formality. Stan died in 1987. He was a good friend and I am proud to have known him.